Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and today I want to talk about the difference between the climbing roses on the one hand and the rambling roses on the other. Climbers and ramblers, these terms are used almost interchangeably and somewhat confusingly, so I'm going to go right to the core of the difference is that the climbing roses, the modern climbers as I may call them, are usually repeat blooming flowers. They can bloom in the late spring all the way through summer and then into fall, and heck, they'll keep on blooming so long as there's enough energy from the sun and temperature to keep on going. The ramblers are a different beast typically. Most of those will bloom like their wild relatives once in the year, usually late spring or early summer. They'll have this massive flush of cluster flowers and then they'll be done for the season and they won't bloom anymore. So it's cultivated versus less cultivated, and those modern hybrids can have access to a wider range of colors. The climbers can come in things like strong orange, a true deep red, mixes of colors, blends of colors, bicolors. So they get the advantage when it comes to stronger and wider range of colors. Typically the ramblers come in ranges of white, pink, yellow. Those are natural tones for roses, and then things between those in more subtle shades, with a few exceptions. So color-wise, the climbers have the advantage. Next thing is about size. Usually your modern climbers will be between 8 and say 15 feet typically in size. The ramblers can be much larger than that. You can take 30 feet of your back fence and put it out to Seven Sisters. It'll swallow the whole thing up, or they'll scramble up a tree and bloom in giant clusters, as I've seen. So yeah, it can be a much larger rose. Other things, fragrance, it's mixed on both. Some hybrids have great scent and some have almost none at all, and some of the ramblers have a really good scent too. In terms of hardiness, it's a mixed bag. I would give the slight advantage to the ramblers just because they have typically closer relations to their wild relatives, so they're usually a little more hardy, but there are exceptions to that as well. So with those being the main differences, one of them being quite cultivated and repeat blooming and more like the hybrid teas and the floribundas, and one being more like the wild relatives, let's get specifically into some examples from both the climbers and the ramblers. Here's something interesting about the breeding of climbing roses. They are not a breed of roses, they're a behavior or a growing habit. If you look at the family tree of roses where it describes how each class is related to the other, the climbers don't belong anywhere on that list because they actually come from all parts of that. You can have climbers from amongst the miniatures, the hybrid teas, the floribundas, the noisettes, the bourbons. All of these different classes of roses have climbers from within them, and typically what happens is as they breed roses, sometimes you will have a regular shrub-sized rose, and then there will be a sport, one stem of that rose that jumps up and is just much larger than the others. It's clearly a genetic mutation, spontaneous within the plant, so they take a cutting of that and then they root it, and it ends up being a climber and stable, and then they save that as a climbing variation from one of these roses. That's one way it can come. Other times they're just climbers from birth, but that's the thing, is that they're not a breed of roses or a class of roses, they're a behavior of roses. So I'm going to give you some examples here that highlight that fact. The first one I want to bring up is a rose called Laura Ford, which is a climbing miniature, which sounds like a complete contradiction. How can it be miniature and a climber? Well, the flowers are miniature, and the breeding is from the miniature roses, the polyanthas and the minis, but it is a climber up to about 8 feet. Next one I want to talk about is Leverkusen, and Leverkusen would exemplify ones that are bred from the Floribunda group, and this one has, I think it's a Cortez rose, it has those shiny leaves. The third one I want to talk about, switching colors now into sort of a silvery pink, is Aloha. And Aloha, I'm talking here about the 1949 version. I think there have been other versions in the meantime, but this climber just has a kick you in the face kind of scent and great well-formed flowers, and it's from within the hybrid tea group of roses. Next up, I wanted to go to the grandifloras. Queen Elizabeth is the original grandiflora, and from my video I did a couple weeks ago on the hybrid teas versus the floribundas, This is a hybrid between the two of them where it has both cluster flowering and large flowers, and Queen Elizabeth is in that mid-pink range, really well-formed blooms, and just broke the mold compared to the other roses that were out at the time. Finally, I'll talk about my last choice of climber is Alistair Stella Grey. This one is in the group of noisettes, and this makes it kind of highlights the next point I'm going to make, is that the lines can be blurred between the climbers and the ramblers. Alistair Stella Grey was called a climber because it's repeat blooming. Other names for it are golden rambler, and you're going to find that the noisettes are sort of in that range because of their parentage of having multiflora as a prominent parent. So do the ramblers, and so the cluster flowering makes it look a lot more like a rambler, even though some people class it as a climber. On to the ramblers here. Since the modern climbers are pretty much picked and chosen from amongst the other modern classes of roses, I'll say that the ramblers are pretty much defined by their close genetic relationships with some of the wild roses. Most particularly, you're going to find that they're related to Rosa multiflora, Rosa sempervirens, Rosa setagira or setagira, don't always know how to pronounce those things, and Rosa Wichurana. So the first one I want to talk about here is related to the multifloras, and this one is a rose called Blue Magenta, which is a lot darker than the other ramblers in terms of its color. It's almost a true purple, which makes it kind of special in my mind. Again, large rambler, I'll put the sizes up on the screen as well at the same time, but the multiflora ramblers always bloom in clusters. I probably don't even need to say that about the rest of the ramblers. And the next one I want to talk about is another multiflora rambler called Goldfinch, which is really, really well known for its strong yellow color, and again, a charming rambler. Third one, coming from a different group, from the Wichurana group, is Albertine, and Albertine has one of those wonderful apricot colors. I always look for the apricot colors in roses. It's just one of my favorites, and that's a personal bias. So Albertine is one of my favorites. Next up is a rose that's actually coming into growth in my garden right now in a big way. Maybe I'll get a picture here. It's called Heaven's Eye, and this is a Geschwind rambler with a darker center to the flower and lighter outside petals. Really excellent breeding and a really strong performer in the garden. Next one I want to talk about is American Pillar, and American Pillar does take on sort of a stronger pink color, and I favor the stronger colors, so it deserves a spot on this list. And because of its pliable canes and the fact that it blooms across everywhere, it blooms strongly, it is an excellent subject for pillaring, which is of course why they called it American Pillar. Next up I wanted to mention Adelaide d'Orléans. That one is a Sempervirens hybrid. I'll put up some pictures of Adelaide d'Orléans as well. And finally I wanted to talk about Lady Banks rose, or Rosa Banksii, and this is one of those cases where it is I think a straight species, or a species that was cultivated for some time in China, so it's become a very double rose, and it has these golden yellow flowers that I like a lot, and just a very expansive rose, so you can this one, give it some space for sure. All right, that's all I had to say about the climbers versus the ramblers in the garden. I'll go in and edit it now and add some pictures. But if you have any questions in the meantime about the climbers or the rambling roses, please drop those down below in the comments of the video. I'll see what I can do to help.